Yeah, you don't want none of that with a Blitzkrieg. Um. Anyway, so that's enough of that. Enough of that for them. All right. So since that is smithing, fair is fair. In the laws of Blitzkrieg, would still have people tampering with hot lead all the way over there. All right. As far as that can reach towards the left hemisphere, that would still be cycling people in a Blitzkrieg that way. All right. And then it would start to actually it would keep carrying that. You know what I'm saying? Which is not good. You know, it would keep carrying a lot of bad stuff, and that's the hottest anything's ever been in existence. Um, you know, and we shouldn't like be raising the Blitzkrieg stuff from the dead. All right, but anyways, so we have none of that going on. All right, none of it. The only thing that grows is the healthy things. Then we got the cornstalk, tomatoes, I believe cucumbers, lots of peppermint, tons of peppermint, and then the California poppies are going to be growing from here. I figure since it's in a controlled environment and the weather's not so windy, because the plant is sowing. The plant is sowing and spreading like that. And, it will fizzle out at the top. It'll burn itself out too quick. Um, and then when you actually use a purple light, not just a purple light, but a perfectly balanced light, which is perfectly balanced of UVA and UV blue light. Um, it can actually keep cycling at nighttime too. And then that is perfectly balanced, so it's not too much to burn it out, and then that actually is good for the cycle. Um, and then they actually do market light bulbs that are like that. That they're not all purple. They just have them made designed to be perfectly balancing UVA, and UV blue light. All right. So since that is already smithing, you don't want none of that. And then removing that from the outside. And I took the iron supplement today. I started cycling the iron supplement. It's a raw vitamin code iron supplement with cabbage, apple, beet. There's a good blend of that and enzymes and a form of iron that is a little bit easier digested. I enjoyed the one from rice that is from coming from rice hulls. All right, so supplementing rice hulls in the body is actually more flame retardant, and that's phosphorus. You know what I'm saying? So in the actual heat where the rice hull is harvested or is growing, it actually is it's bursting out with phosphorus. You know what I'm saying? Phosphorus isn't necessarily on fire or anything like that. And then this method right here actually quickly cools phosphorus faster in the light. You know what I'm saying? So if you think about how that works like a rifle, all right, well a rifle is using nitrogen, all right, like we do. We use nitrogen, plants grow like that, and it is actually combating something from catching on fire. You know what I'm saying? This actually does control. It basically does cool things down faster, and faster and faster and faster. So that's why I actually prefer um, this technique for smithing. All right, iron is good. Iron is part of the process there, and then this is a little bit more advanced. And then this is safer metal to use compared to stainless steel. You know what I'm saying? That's abrasive. Or it's not abrasive yet. It could become abrasive. When you actually use that type of bar compared to I use just the usual rusty barbell. You know what I'm saying? I'm not worried about getting tetanus or staph from a barbell. That is the process of understanding that's as much as some neurochemistry is going to be able to understand, and that's as much stress as all human beings could ever withstand. You know what I'm saying? Blitzkrieg stuff and then their BS on the radio and stuff like that. We can't have it part of us. All right, we cannot allow that to be carried on like that because they're that type of risk. All right, they're that type of risk to be cycling things forever and then speaking, the tongue of salmonella. And what is going to happen is, regardless of that, since it's my job, what is going to happen is that is then going to incite Lazarus laws. All right. So Lazarus laws is the laws of karma. And then that is actually going to cause all that stuff that is functional like that and it's fully loaded um, to snap back. You know what I'm saying? And Lazarus tongue is like that. Lazarus tongue is a world of karma, and it would be me forever either taking you to jail or having you surrendered somewhere, or repeatedly everything is going to keep snapping back at you and stuff like that. So when we're moving around on the Achilles, you know what I'm saying, and we can form good grounds, that helps. But that can become a problem, especially when people share the grounds with too much shock and trauma. It is best to be on your heels to toes. You can move around on your toes, but then you also have to think about balancing, the tilt of your hip flexors and your pelvis and things like that, and then air needs to pass through the pathway. And you could have problems with your spine binding and things like that. Most people experience that until they finally um, figure out ways to make peace with something. You know what I'm saying? I have a hard time making peace with something that doesn't make sense. You know what I'm saying? It is forever um, it's forever an Occam's razor type thing. It's forever something like that where that doesn't make sense. All right, if we don't actually complete a cycle or something like that between 72 hours, or not between 72 hours, with a 72-hour window and then a 21-day cycle completely, that is the best way to accurately assess or judge anything. Other than that, what they try to advertise on TV or what we hear on the radio, um, can't. You know what I'm saying? I can't let them have the camera. I can't let them have the microphone. I can't let them. I can do nothing except grab this and say it's an adult time and maritime laws time and time to actually grab that with the rubber grip. All right, and you know, we can't work that out of the bones there. You know what I'm saying? Get a good grip on it with phosphorus because it is meant to be doing that. It's meant to be doing some smithing stuff and remembering about that. Remembering about how terrible it is when something repeatedly tries to attack somebody or people from the left hemisphere of existence from somewhere. And then what happens to it? You know what I'm saying? What happens to something that ever tried doing that? FBI Bones would would happen to know something about that, wouldn't he? He would know something about living and fishing. He would also know something about um, what happened to the enemies and stuff like that. And it's like I said, it's not a good place for your mind to be. You know, it's not a good place for your mind to dwell, conspiring on the left side of your mind. But when something is trapping you there, you know what I'm saying? You that is the fighting mentality. That is mentally fighting. You know, that is mentally then fighting with yourself or resisting yourself. You know what I'm saying? Rather than experiencing empathy, you know, rather than experiencing empathy for something or having a conscience, um, that's not how a person's mind works. You know that what's right is right and what's wrong is wrong. And it's not necessarily about you know, one person's personal view or opinion. All right, that is frustrating. All right, that is so frustrating that people are like looking to be fought. All right, you know what I'm saying? They are repeatedly putting themselves in a position to like where they are going to be there. You know what I'm saying? They're going to be on that side of that. You know, and they'll already be trying to be tampering devils. They'll already be trying to be in arrest or be carried, you know, poorly. You know, or spreading, you know, spreading problems and stuff like that. It's not a good thing, and it's also not good for your DNA and your RNA and your you know, your longevity and your health. All right. So the reason that people you know, the reason like your thyroid gland functions is to fight radiation and then cancer. All right. And you know, mutations. All right. And sickness. You know what I'm saying? Like this is something that is supposed to be happening. Thyroid gland is supposed to be popping out here, you know, with a defense there, you know, called AR-15. All right. And then the thyroid gland is also supposed to have contact here with you know, that, which would be, you know, a big ass Glock, you know, that is kind of part of um the chemistry of an existence. Okay, and an existence that is welcome. All right, you know what I'm saying? And then there are things that are not welcome. And then there are things that have to be fought. You know what I'm saying? And then there are things that do actually need to be done on a higher, you know, on a higher level of understanding, which is like God's orders, doctor's orders. And I'm not talking about on their side of malpractices. I'm talking about being an adult, you know, and what is you know, what is accepted by peers or what is exactly you know, requested, you know, for people to be functional as human beings. All right, but that ain't so easy when a human being wakes up to the sun. All right, and then there's a blitzkrieg tank that's been tampering, you know, with all of God in existence and the chemistry of people. You know what I'm saying? That the stuff that we cannot allow people to be doing constantly is messing with, you know, the chemistry of people, and then trying to get under people's skin, and then like torturing them like repeatedly with so much stuff that is called reactions that are not neutral. All right, and then that is specifically why those lights, you know, flash red to blue, or and why it cycles like that, or why it did do this or why it did do that, or why we use the color red, white, and blue. You know what I'm saying? Like there's a reason that there's a summons from God, and stuff like that. There is a reason things go on in your life that you know are not yet understood, but there's a purpose for it. All right, that means you're still, you know, you're still living. Okay, you're still cycling. You're still mentally going to be, you know, doing well. All right, but it's like I said, it's just not an easy thing to be going on here with the Bones guy. Um, and what our job is, because our job is to actually bring people out of arrest, all right, and keep people from experiencing tons of shock and trauma, and not letting that stick to the left side of their mind. You know what I'm saying? So why we and I and other people, as far as like peers, because that's how I learned this, from studies with my peers. And those things are readily available. The left cerebral cortex is inactive. It's extremely inactive, and it should stay um neutral. You know what I'm saying? A human being's mind should stay neutral. And then there's like, that would be the spiritual side. That would be the connection to the earth, all right, and nature. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's that way to navigate the vagal nerve pathway of existence. And that's like what that is. You know what I'm saying? That's a big vagus nerve that grows from existence, that we can be hooked up to, all right, and things like that. So when you look at the world, the best way to kind of understand that is looking at the world like gaining an advantage, because your mind is a GPS. It's a navigation system. And there's blitzkrieg tanks that cycle in the heat, and cycled forever. And they were tampering with all of existence. You know what I'm saying? So that the message from God wasn't getting through. If you want to like look at an example of obstruction, that has forever screwed everything up for like all of existence. And that could be so bad for, and it was so bad for all of existence. All right, so something that goes on like that, that's instantly flagged for 30 years for war crimes. You know what I'm saying? It's because it was tampering with hot lead, and it's sharp. You know what I'm saying? That would be so sharp and so goddamn hot, and it actually would keep people under it all the time. And it does hop up there and start tampering, with their mind. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you can understand that you have orbital lobes here, and you need to be able to rise back up and wake up in the sun, and there's certain things that your body is going to reject, and your mind is not going to accept. You know what I'm saying? And even like the best thing that I could really do is explain this, that the left cerebral cortex is not going to have a bunch of of trauma and shock being stuck to the body. You know what I'm saying? It's no longer going to experience that, and then it can actually just move in a good you know a good way towards escaping hell. You know what I'm saying? Because that is seriously just doing stuff like this all the time, and things not being neutral to people. Um, it's trapping them in hell. You know what I'm saying? They can't breathe helium. You know what I'm saying? That's all day. If we're just doing this, and we're on our toes or our heels and stuff like that, or we're just trapping, all that stuff going on, and it's not breathing. Well, many things can go on there, and helium is a big one. Helium in a gas giant, and people being pretty much they're being under it. You know what I'm saying? Like napalm would create that reaction of helium just taking over all of the environment, and then we can't breathe. You know what I'm saying? I mean, physically, the body cannot do any of that stuff without nitrogen and iron oxide, and then this is the stuff that's going to go on here with alchemy again. Um, and that's the best way to go about that. But when the body is experiencing stuff that's like malaria and tons of helium and tons of fire, and things are spreading, you know what I'm saying? That is how I fight that. I fight that by actually becoming, rising and becoming nitrogen. All right. And nitrogen just has that reaction with phosphorus. Phosphorus would be like heat signatures constantly sticking. You know what I'm saying? It would just keep being hot, and phosphorus would keep getting hotter and hotter and hotter, and then that would keep opening up the backside, which is that's what napalm does. You know what I'm saying? It gets hotter and hotter and hotter, and then it's like solar winds, and then the Earth is creating like an electrical storm like that, and then it's passing through and it's knocking everything out. It could even surge all the electricity and the power, and we don't want to be touching that. All right, I mean, it's like seriously, we really cannot have people tampering with things like that because it could really really cause harm to them. So these things like that and being non-sterile. Okay, remember that. All right, you do not want to be in sterile. Okay, you want to be non-sterile. All right, especially when you're, if you're going through a detox or a cleanse and you're going to be exercising and you actually are going to be joining me in some way, um, because I have to be able to bond with things and experience empathy. I do have to fight. You know what I mean? I do have to keep enemies in their place. I do have to understand. You know what I'm saying? I do need you to understand this, that something called Magpul already exists, and something called Blitzkrieg tanks going to fucking hell, and we won't let you go with them. Already exists. All right. So if you try to enter those cycles and stuff like that, that is already what I'm doing. Is passing through time, and then that is, then that would actually be something that would be going on there. All right. So when something tries to behave like that, that's that stuff that goes on with the vest. And that there was, that's two vests that I actually had to take a look at, because they're designed to discharge the static electricity and then prevent abrasions. You know what I'm saying? Prevent a bunch of problems going on with the vital stuff because it's passing through time, and those people are a pain in the ass with everything. All right. So from that to the heavy bag vest that was at the gym, and I appreciate people introducing me to, newer ways to exercise because I like the stress. All right. I like the stress and I like being able to fix those problems over time. You can't really fix a problem with helium that tries to spread throughout the body. You know what I'm saying? That is what is trying to go on there with the ganglier stuff being carried, and then that having a reaction with stuff and spreading throughout your body. Um, that's what the bones and the DNA and the RNA already block in the first place. So, what can go on depending on like the environments and things like that, especially when you are, you're deficient in your diet. You know what I mean? You're deficient, or you're burning yourself out in the sun in the heat way too much. And I'm going to give you a break. You know what I'm saying? Because I can actually live and grow, in the sun and the heat. You know what I'm saying? I just do not, I don't recommend what goes on there with the left hemisphere of existence. And then people trying to spend too much time there with things, their mind. You know what I mean? They're spending too much time dwelling in their mind, and they'll be conspiring. They'll be making their life more difficult for themselves by just not having the right type of charge. You know what I'm saying? Not having the right type of charge, and mentally understanding that that's going to be positive, negative, static. It's always positive, negative, static, and then understanding why that's important to learn. Good motor skills and motor function. And building good neurochemistry, and then connections and fibers, and healing and growing the good, and not the bad, because the body is going to be, um, the body's going to be going through detoxing and cleansing, and being cured, with good weather. So that was tough stuff at like negative 15 degrees, where I was working and cycling, and I had to wear a special, especially after arson, I had to wear a special forensic suit, and I was able to be protected well. You know what I mean? And that was, that's always really really good to be upgrading and patching and bonding the neurochemistry to live and grow and tell Blitzkrieg tanks to go to fucking hell. And people who tamper with things like that or cause problems, to like tell them to go to fucking hell. All right, I don't give a fuck. All right, I don't give a fuck if you show up as a plain clothes person with a vest on, and I don't care. All right, tell them to go to fucking hell. All right, the line is drawn right there, at capital murder and manslaughter. Okay, and when something behaves like that, that's way past capital murder and manslaughter, and we got to put a heavy bag vest on a body, on our bodies, and weigh all that stuff back down, and then they are going to have to learn, the hard way about, why it's best to not be doing that, because if you get involved in a conflict, um, with a human being, then I am going to be, resolving it, and things like that. So I just always am the type of person that fights manslaughter. You know what I'm saying? That's just where I draw the line there with all of existence. Um, is something needs to understand that there's like a higher God, there's higher gods, there's higher realms, there's things like that, there's things that are not yet understood, and it doesn't necessarily take sleuthing and being sneaky and suspicious to to have to live like this. You know what I'm saying? That's how Interpol works. Meaning, stuff will start to swarm people. And when people are messing with dangerous stuff, or they're just being, that type of problem, meaning criminal. All right, meaning they're asexual and they're like flying around. All right, and then they're trying to like make everything in existence asexual, and then they're trying to like alter the chemistry of people in existence and natural ways to be living, forever. So that's not a good way to approach that. All right. The best way to approach that is understanding that the problem is and always will be the environment is ganglier, and then the environment starts to spread, or you know what I'm saying. And what goes on with people is they want to feel better about their life, and there's certain things that we hate. You know what I'm saying? And I seriously hate when people do that to human beings, because they do just pile up like the shock and the trauma, and they try to carry it around, and then they're, you know what I'm saying? And then it's not healthy. You know what I mean? It's the body failing. It's the body trying to fail itself. All right, and it's best to have that removed. All right. So what I do somewhere, in the middle of that, is how my teeth are designed. They're the bicuspids and incisors and expand. You know what I'm saying? And expanders and canines. Those are actually the canine teeth. And then they expand. So the whole thing, the whole pathway, actually is then carried by me and then open back up, and I can just do that with my wrist. You know what I'm saying? I can just physically reach out with like a weapon, all right, and grab that and then expand that. All right, that is the process of the brachioradialis. All right, the brachioradialis is hanging there. All right, and then they can form good, connections and stuff like that. All right, and then it is always doing stuff, but then we also want to remove contact with things. We don't still want to be, messing with certain things. All right, so in out, and then how that actually works with rehabilitating that, and opening up like the hip of a human being and things like that, and taking off the problems with the spine, because that is binding. All right, and I can fight a lot of that. You know what I'm saying? The way I'm designed is it doesn't matter how much pressure I go under. I go under tons and tons and tons of pressure, and eventually the laws of nature still make me rise. You know what I'm saying? But that stuff would not. You know what I'm saying? A Blitzkrieg tank ain't gonna, or people tampering with hot lead. That's not rising ever again. In bad bread, and how that works with bread, and people experiencing rhabdomyolysis, or problems with things getting under their skin. That can be bad. All right. So just understanding that all comes from bread. You know what I'm saying? That those would be long term things that are going on with the body, and then it functions like bread. You know what I mean? It can have a bad response to bread. Um, it can have a bad response to a lot of things. And then when you actually have to make your own bread, when you have to do those things by your, that's what I'm trying to say, is that That's something that definitely takes about 72 hours for a person to like recover. You know what I'm saying? If a human being has to make bread all the time and work with bread and things like that, that could eventually cause a problem for their body called rhabdomyolysis. So that is how the body is, you know, that is why it's good to not keep the bad things. You know what I'm saying? Your body needs to not just accept that it's going to start embalming itself internally and rejecting everything about its life. You know what I'm saying? That is a problem. You know what I'm saying? There's a problem with people and their chemistry and what can go on there with when they are trying to become a nuisance, all right? Meaning tampering, all right? Meaning something is around and existing to try to antagonize me and and kill me. You know what I'm saying? There is things that are around like that, and my mind is stronger and more powerful. And if it's trying to tamper with me, such as like a blitzkrieg tank, I'm gonna blow it up. All right, I'm gonna send all the I can send all the charges right back to it, and things like that. When something functions like that, that is how my chemistry is already designed.